Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good. I'm good.
I'm so excited that this is finally happening. Okay, and Nick is here too. Hang on. I don't want to keep you in waiting room purgatory. Hey Nick, can you hear us?
Yes, indeed. Hear you just fine.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so excited for this, and people are queuing up in the waiting room Zoom purgatory zone already. Um, And yeah, I guess I just wanted to, thank you both before all of this. It feels like we're all, grasping at straws for silver linings in the pandemic here, but it does feel like a silver lining to be able to do things like this.
Yeah, totally. Hi, Nick. How's it going?
Things are all right. They're going.
Yeah.
Made it through the semester, probably at this rate.
Yeah.
It's been a heavy teaching load, and there's more yet to go, but things are all right. How are things with you?
Heavy teaching load, heavy advising load, heavy MFA directing load, heavy planning everything load, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I was emailing with Craig. He sends his love, says hello.
Oh, great. I was thinking of him because someone was trying to sell a Robert Smithson book, and Craig just wrote a piece about Smithson, about Spiral Jetty, and
Oh, yeah.
So I bought this lovely book that I haven't had time to read yet from a guy for $5.
Cool. No, you're not in Massachusetts, Nick. No, you're still in New York.
Yeah, I'm in New York right now. Although actually we're going up to Boston tomorrow for a brief time, just to basically run some errands up there. If you look at the Massachusetts, where you can come in from, that you don't have to quarantine, it's just in between New York and Massachusetts. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. Well. So,
hey, Dan.
Carly,
Oops, sorry. Go ahead, Lillian.
Just quick, just logistics in terms of how things are going, right? So, I know you said that you'd introduce us at the start, and that we'd sort of take questions at the end, which I guess sounds fine to me. Although I'm happy to have a longer Q&A session. I mean, I am interested to know. And to hear what questions people have. I don't know, Nick, how you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to interleave that discussion.
Yeah.
With some presentation and reading.
Definitely. Okay. Yeah, that works great. Yeah, I was planning on just giving a short introduction and then sort of handing it over to you two, and I can help moderate the Q&A, and I'm going to encourage people to drop questions and stuff in the Zoom chat so we can sort of pre-queue things up, and then can kind of intersperse things from there, if that works.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Cool. Well, that sounds like a plan then. And then Dan Anderson, my advisor and sort of the mastermind behind the Digital Innovation Lab at UNC, is joined us too. So let's see that.
Hi, Dan.
Yeah.
Carly, are you actually on campus?
Yeah, so my Wi-Fi in my apartment is terrible, so I stole a key from Dan and I'm in the sort of Digital Innovation Lab space on campus. My apartment doesn't have these lovely popcorn ceilings.
We thought it might be an image to remind you of the commercial building.
What it's like to be in, a 1970s brutalist college building. Delightful.
Right, of all images, right? What would that be, the one that you would choose?
Oh God, I hope not. Not particularly inspiring, is it?
Yeah, no, our UMass Boston campus is the same way, and there are some nice images, however, and so people have been using them, as their backgrounds, and I'm like, well, that's good. That's better than the mound of construction dirt, out front or something. But as you can see, I've been using an avatar. that I appreciate. Really, constant zooming is exhausting. But I try to dress like my avatar. So it is like an accurate representation of like how I am in the moment, with the exception of the hair, because with the avatar you can do fun things.
Does it change day to day, season to season, the avatar?
I can customize it.
Okay.
So I can change it. I changed its shirt today, and I added glasses.
Oh, that's
as
great.
Well.
I love it. Let's see. Oh, Lillian-Yvonne. So Gabby Cavacaresi is in the waiting room, and I'm gonna admit her and say hi really quick.
Oh, cool. Gabby!
Hi, everyone. Hey, Lillian. Hello.
Hi, Gabby. How are you?
I'm
Hey,
good.
Gabby.
How are you?
I'm good.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so glad to see you here.
Oh, it's good to see you.
I gave you a note on Instagram saying a little something about something else. So I'm so excited about today, but this was about the future too.
Okay.
Which I'm also excited about. Hi, Carly.
Cool.
Hey, Gabby. How are you doing?
Good. I'm glad to see you. Hi, Kieran. My whole class is coming today.
Oh, heck yeah.
I'm excited. I'm actually going to
great.
mute and turn my video off for a second because I'm just going to walk into the other room.
Okay, cool.
Let's see. I'm going to start admitting people, and we can just sort of let people trickle in. Let's see. Hi, everybody. It's good to see new faces, familiar faces, new names, familiar names. Throw in the chat where you're coming to us from, because that's always, you know, the fun thing about Zoom. And we can get the chat going that way too. Erica from New York City, hi.
Erica, I know you. Hi.
Let's see. I see my lovely landlord, Tom. Hi, Tom. Let's see. All right. So it's right at 4. I imagine more folks are going to trickle in. Keep saying hi. It's good to see you. Hi. Is that Mandy? Hi, Mandy. Let's see. All right. So as people trickle in, I can go ahead and get started because I know we have much more exciting things to get to and a really, really exciting conversation ahead. And basically, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for being here. It's such a treat to see so many digital humanists and poets from North Carolina and from all over. Because this is the first event for our speaker series, I wasn't exactly sure what the interest would be, and it's blown me away so far. And we've got a great group going as a working group, and even more folks who are wanting to be involved in the conversation series. So if that's something that's of interest to you, don't hesitate to get in touch, and we'll have a lot of other fun things up our sleeve. But welcome, hello. This is the first event for our speaker series, If Then, Technology and Poetics. And in this speaker series, We bring together writers, coders, and scholars, investigating the relationships between humans and machines and the works of art and literature that they produce together. We're so excited to have you here, and we're so excited to have Lillian-Yvonne Bertram and Nick Montfort in conversation with us today. So quick background on Lillian-Yvonne Bertram and Nick Montfort. They will introduce themselves in a minute. But Lillian-Yvonne Bertram is an associate professor in the Department of English at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, where they teach in and direct the UMass Boston MFA in Creative Writing program. They're the author of numerous poetry collections, most recently Travesty Generator, which was the winner of the 2018 Noemi Press Poetry Prize and was a finalist for the National Poetry Series. Travesty Generator also received the 2020 Poetry Society of America Anna Rabinowitz Prize for interdisciplinary and venturesome work. And it was also recently longlisted for the 2020 National Book Award, which is amazing. Lillian-Yvonne is also the author of How Narrow My Escapes, Personal Science, A Slice from the Cake Made of Air, and But a Storm is Blowing from Paradise, among many, many other wonderful publications. And Nick Montfort studies creative computing and develops computational art and poetry. His computer-generated books of poetry include Hard West Turn, the collaboration 2x6, Autotopia, and The True List. His digital projects include the collaborations The Deletionist and Sea and Spar Between. And his MIT Press books, collaborative and individual, are The New Media Reader, Twisty Little Passages, Racing the Beam, among many others. He is a professor of digital media at MIT and lives in New York. Lillian and Nick, thank you so much for being here. Thrilled to welcome you to UNC virtually. And throughout the conversation, we'll have time for questions. We'll have a longer Q&A section at the end, but Lillian-Yvonne and Nick have both agreed to kind of take questions throughout the discussion today. So as things come up, just drop them in the chat and we'll get to them either as part of the discussion or after. So without further ado, Lillian-Yvonne Bertram and Nick Montfort.
Hi, hello everyone. It's great to be here virtually. I'm in my virtual form, as you can see, really leaning into the virtual world, as the case may be. I want to thank Carly for setting this up, and for UNC, for Nick for agreeing to be here and doing this. As Carly mentioned in my bio, I teach at UMass Boston, and I just want to acknowledge that the campus of UMass Boston, which is in present-day Dorchester, is on the land that historically has belonged to the Massachusetts Confederation tribes, specifically the Neponsets, who are in present-day Dorchester. So that's where UMass Boston is coming from in terms of whose lands we currently occupy. So that's something I'm kind of thinking about today. I know, Carly, you had sort of asked us a few questions to kind of get us going, but, and among them being sort of like talking about the intersections of our work, Nick's work and my own. So Nick, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that I've been circling around and thinking about that, Lillian-Yvonne, was really the perhaps unusual specificities, the way that digital poetry, I think things that we've both done with computer-generated text and things that we see in other people's work can maintain and memorialize particularly important aspects of history. It's very clear in Travesty Generator, and it's in the way that through the mangling and transformation of language that you present, for instance, that we remember not just Emmett Till's disfigured face, which is a horrifying image from the early times of the civil rights movement, but also a phrase, I just wanted the world to see what they did to my baby. And we understand that that is something that's ultimately presented not out of shock, not purely out of rage or resistance, but it's out of care. It's something that comes from a mother's love. That phrase is something that we need to remember also. That language is something that we need to remember. And that's the type of engagement that computing, I think, offers us. There's a reason that we have in the highest level diagram of the computer, we would assign to part of that representation memory. Actually, Babbage wanted to call it something else instead of processor and memory. He would call it the mill and the store. So it was an industrial type of metaphor rather than a cognitive or mental metaphor. But the computer does have this function of memory and of carrying forward what we can do and of memorializing, and I don't think it's widely acknowledged. One of the ways that I've tried to deal with this is actually through other artistic mediations and representations. So many of us are probably familiar with Untitled Painting by Glenn Ligon. I Am a Man, as is known.
Yeah.
And I have a Commodore 64 program, one of many that I've written, that is based on an artwork. I have some based on poems as well. And it is an enactment of this 1968 text from the Memphis sanitation workers' strike. And it does something different. It presents it as a text that was embraced and that was taken up by a variety of different people as individuals, not a single uniform sign. It doesn't showcase the close materiality that Ligon's painting does. It doesn't engage with it in the same way. It does bring forth the idea that ideas of masculinity, ideas very different than intersectionality today, were associated with humanity at that point. That the assertion that one is a man is the way in which you assert that you're human in a particular way, and that the alliances have to be drawn with that in mind.
I think that's that's so fascinating. And I love that you brought up memory and also memorializing, and, you know, that phrase from Emmett Till's mother. I mean, there's something in that, right? Like this desire for the world to be able to see something that it maybe would rather cover up, right? And that has me thinking a lot about sort of like, you know, the way that racial inequity is encoded, so that it's, on one hand, it's that it's obvious, right? Like the murder of Emmett Till is like obvious, overt racism. But then there are the ways in which racial inequities are coded so that they're invisible, and, you know, and are embedded at the level of algorithms and code. And there are like numerous, right, like public instances of like how that works, right, down to, you know, who gets to live where, who gets to, you know, make how much money, and, you know, credit scores, all those sorts of things, right? These more insidious racial codes, and the desire to, you know, have the Emmett Till's face visible, right? Like to make visible what happened. I think, like, and I've been thinking about this lately as something that is really motivating a lot of my work, right? To make visible the black box that is technology, and also, you know, encoded power, which isn't always visible, right? So the more insidious ways of how racism works are hyper visible in some cases, but then there are other ways that are less visible. And memorializing it, yes, as a form of tenderness, but also, you know, in Travesty Generator, there's definitely a moment in which, you know, the program runs out of memory, or at least my computer runs out of memory, right, when I run it, which takes me all the way back to like the early 1990s, right? With like when 256, you know, KB was like a big deal. That was so much memory. And this idea of what can't be held, right, in this computational or you know, computer space, when we think of the cloud and whatnot now as limitless places. But the inability to, even though we have statistics on like, you know, what happens to Black life, there's at the same time this inability to grasp its complexity and the loss that is at work also.
Yes, I'm interested in definitely what it means to be out of memory, because, and what it means to be virtual. I'm here in my virtual form also, although my virtual form is a different type of virtual form, Lillian-Yvonne, than yours. Of course, I have a video form rather than an avatar, and we can think about the virtual from the sort of Baudrillard sense, Jean Baudrillard's idea that the virtual is fake. Yeah. Or you could think about the virtual as something that could be real, maybe more like Lyotard's idea, that a utopian idea might be virtual, and then it's not real at this point, but it could be realized. And something that's out of memory could be something we forgot, or it could be something we need to imagine.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in those things. Go ahead, please.
No, that just, I mean, just made me think of like, you know, something that we've yet to imagine or that has yet to be realized, right? Maybe like at the level of comprehension.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly my hope for what you know, the positive side of what's out of memory is not just that it was cast aside, but that it's something that we still have to construct together. We have to write together. We have to program together. We have to develop that structure and that framework.
Yeah, and there's ways too in which, like, I'm thinking of, you know, like Tubman's Rock and Travesty Generator, which is a poem that is formed from a variety of different sources, right? Some of those sources are, you know, CNN articles. Some of them are, you know, lists of quote unquote slave codes, right? Like Underground Railroad codes that slaves used to talk to each other, but also like Google searches. And those things aren't fixed, right? So like at some point in time, like people, when they're talking about Trayvon Martin, you know, the recommended thing is, well, people are also searching for Emmett Till, or vice versa, right? When people are searching for Emmett Till, they are also maybe searching for Trayvon Martin, and which it was ghastly, obviously, but also like that's not necessarily going to be the case always. Right? It might not be the case that people are also searching for Emmett Till. And
I have to admit, when I first, you know, read your book, I don't use Google as my search engine. I use DuckDuckGo. I avoid using Google services. And so actually the people also ask, I actually didn't understand that this is the framework of Google suggesting the searches, which is, you know, which everyone else did. Upon reading this book. So this is my out of the loop experience. I knew about, you know, a lot of the particular projects. I knew about, you know, Tape Mark 1 and Balestrini's work and things like this.
But that's like, what if, you know, and if that no longer occurs in Google search, and I applaud you for avoiding all things Google. I'm not quite there yet, but, you know, like if that stops appearing, you know, I wonder about the world, you know, the world in which people stop asking what happened to Emmett Till. And if that, you know, not that Google is necessarily a reliable indicator of people not asking, but I do wonder, right? Like, what does that indicate? Does that indicate like a thorough saturation of the knowledge of what happened to Emmett Till, or does it indicate a kind of mass forgetfulness, right?
Or does it indicate a corporate avoidance also? Because you can't ask a GPT-3 to write about Black Lives Matter. That topic is not available as a topic for text generation.
Oh, I didn't know that about GPT-3. Interesting.
I was brought up, I was listening, so Hannes, who's joined us from Germany, Hannes actually from Switzerland, Hannes Bior was on the conference, and the talk was in German, so I'm not sure I got everything right, but from what I could tell in the slide, it seemed clearly depicted that there's certain topics that you give to GPT-3. GPT-3 is another system along with Google that I don't use. But there's certain topics which might have to do with, which do have to do with Black Lives Matter, LGBT rights, that the system is programmed to decline to generate texts upon these topics.
That's fascinating. I use GPT-2.
Yeah.
But I've fine-tuned GPT-2 in such a way that so that it doesn't, so it does not avoid those topics. So it's explicitly, it's not unlikely for like my instance when I'm running it, right? It's talking a lot about Black life. But that's also having to do with like what I trained it on, right? So like the
Right.
input, the input can certainly condition the output. But I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I see Hannes is saying that there's a list of sensitive topics that's blocked, at least in the instance of GPT-2 that I use. I'm not sure that that's the case.
For GPT-3.
Yeah, GPT-3.
Yeah, but where it's language generation as a service. It's a closed system.
Because they're charging for that now, right? They're charging for GPT-3.
If it's out of beta, yeah. That's the model for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there was a question in the chat from.
Yeah, Grant had a good question. Grant, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. My question, was, I guess, GPT-3 or GPT-2, these are all language models that, are developed and trained through different texts. And don't we have like enough text now, especially with like all the Black Lives protests and a corpus of Black authors, that we could create a language model that accounts for those sorts of texts? Is it just like do we just not have enough text to train a model of that? Or is there just not an interest and skill to create those sorts of models?
I mean, I can't really answer specifically about like the workings of GPT-2 and 3. I mean, I know that they are trained on like truly massive, like incomprehensibly massive amounts of text, like hundreds and millions of billions of words, right? Which, like, where else are they going to get those from if not the internet? What happens on the internet? There's a lot of racist garbage. And so,
well, and beyond, and also
yeah.
the history of Western publishing, which has its own trail of racist garbage.
Right,
exactly. Well, not entirely in different ways, but yeah. So yes, as Mark Sample points out, GPT-2 is trained on Reddit posts. If you want to train things on internet text, then one of the problems you have to deal with is that a lot of internet text is computer generated to begin with. And so starting with Reddit, looking at things that are upvoted that have, and looking at things that, seem in that framework to be human authored, right, gives you one type of filter to talk about. Yeah, I think there's a question, do we sort of imagine, like, what do we imagine happening with transformer-based language models, which is what BERT, GPT-2, GPT-3 are, and they're used in machine translation, they're used in text generation. So, I mean, one thing to point out is that the whole idea of generating text from these models is, it's a sort of accidental byproduct. I mean, language models weren't developed so that you can give them a sentence and they write an article.
Right.
They're developed to do things like topic modeling or machine translation. There's a list of these so-called useful tasks. And so the fact that these models are able to hallucinate about things, and that hallucinate, you know, Ovid's unicorn and so forth. It's like, well, I mean, they can do that, but we're sort of critiquing aesthetically, you know, whether that text is good or bad, and it's not the use for which it's being developed at all. So, I mean, another thing we could ask is, you know, to what extent machine translation models, which incorporate other vectors of linguistic power between different language communities, between, you know, providing access to medical information, providing access to business links and communication, right? To what extent are those affected by recent developments in these technologies?
Yeah, I love that you said that you called it hallucinate. That definitely describes like my experience with so much of GPT-2 is that it does hallucinate semi-coherent blocks of text. But you know, to the question, like, don't we have enough text, right, available by Black authors, let's say, or enough text about Black Lives Matter to do something different with these models? I mean, as Nick rightly points out, right, publishing itself has this long history, not just of racist garbage, but also just of, like, you know, exclusivity, right, and gatekeeping in terms of who has access, right? These models are trained on things like Reddit posts and internet text because it's readily available and it's digital. Right. So what about, you know, not every poetry book, for example, or every book by a Black author is made digital or is available, right? So like there's paywalls to digital text into those files, right? So there are a lot of things that exist in the physical world, right, that are not necessarily available for, you know, the training models to grab a hold of. And we could ask, you know, like why that is, right? So there are sort of like these layers of impediments to how these models get trained. But again, like what they're being trained on is, a lot of it is implicit and explicit coded inequity. And that's what shows up in their results. You know, someone put the racist chatbot in the chat, and that's right, the racist chatbot. It's, you know, a lot of technoscience makes these sorts of things invisible and efficient, including, you know, racism and enacting it, right, through things like chatbots.
Yeah, I mean, you can locate, I mean, one of the questions would be, as an artistic or literary project, where would you locate GPT-3? And I would say, you know, it is coherent with the project of surrealism, in that it's an attempt to surface the unconscious of the internet in this case, or even beyond that, because it's trained on digitized texts, things that are online as well. It's this attempt to surface all of that linguistic sort of unconscious. And I mean, when the surrealists played their surrealist writing games, they wrote racist things, and they
Yes.
they also brought, you know, that came up, and it wasn't that good. I mean, the outputs, you know, the surrealist games themselves are better than any writing done using those surrealist games. And
Yeah.
similarly, I think, you know, it may be the case that GPT-3 as a system, as a project, is a very provocative work of literary art, but that nothing made with it is any good.
Yeah, I mean, I would I would agree with that. You know, I like the idea of surfacing the unconscious of the internet, and also the ways in which, like, things like GPT-3 and their output, they suggest the possibility of new generated narratives, which I think is an interesting prospect, right? Especially when, you know, depending on how well the model is trained, it can generate, you know, chunks of cohesive narrative, you know, hundreds of words at a time. But also, again, thinking about what are these models trained on? They're trained on already on plenty of generated text, right? That's been generated by other models. And it's trained on, pre-existing narratives, and those narratives themselves, right, raise a lot of questions. I'll often think about, the output is just a small part of what's going into the whole project. It's, for lack of a better metaphor, it's like, the meal is only as good as the ingredients, and what you give it. And so if you're scraping it from Reddit or from Amazon reviews, right, like already the issues of who's going to be represented there, you have to foreground those, right, when you're talking about these things.
Well, it's interesting because what you were just talking about reminded me of the Zong poems that Norbies Philip does, where the text is the Zong case, and yet the poems that come from it empower and actually remember bodies that were, just kind of erased, right? Like, I think there's something interesting to be said about using the text that is inherently racist and terrible and doing something new with it.
Yeah, you can use the text, and you can use the technology to illuminate that which the technology is trying to obscure, right? And sometimes it's its own machinations, right? It's its own coded inequities that it attempts to obscure and hide. And the text of that case itself, right? Like also, wasn't caring so much, wasn't about the bodies per se, right? It was about profit. But that entire discussion, right? Serves to, it buries the bodies on purpose, right? Because that's what that system of slavery was designed to do. It was designed to bury bodies and to not consider them, right, in all their humanity.
I think that's a great point. And I have a question for both of you, Lillian-Yvonne and Nick. I'm sort of curious, like, talking about all of this process of training algorithms, particularly GPT-2 and 3, like, what is your process when using either predictive text technologies, like you, Lillian-Yvonne, you said you trained GPT-2, or writing your own algorithms? Like what is your process in doing that, given, the history of sort of violence in computing?
I mean, it's a huge question. I guess something that I've been thinking about, and this comes from, I've just been lucky enough to be participating in a lot of conversations recently. And so something I've been thinking about is that, like, when I'm working with text generation, or when I'm working with GPT-2, it is always, for me at least, it is always framed, or my engagement with it is framed by these questions of, is there a way to imagine a liberatory engagement with this? Or is there a way, how can I, explore the ways in which this technology reinforces racism, while also, seeing if it's possible to use it in the service of something different, right? So most of my computational projects are framed explicitly by questions of Blackness and anti-Blackness. And my work with GPT-2 is also framed explicitly that way. So, in a lot of cases, like, I've made decisions when I'm, engaging in projects to think about like what work am I going to do? Am I going to use GPT-2 just to write an article for The Guardian? Am I just to demonstrate its ability? What am I going to use it for? And I haven't, answered all of those questions, right? Like, but those are the kinds of things that are animating my work as I go into it, right? Different kinds of generators and projects I've done. I almost exclusively work, when I work with, outside text, I almost exclusively work with text by Black authors. And that's a deliberate choice that I'm making, right? And a lot of my projects have to do with the poet Gwendolyn Brooks, and kind of like dovetailing with what Nick has been saying about memorializing and memory. That's partly why, right? As a way to memorialize it and bring into, whatever future is going to come, this work that I at least consider very important.
So I don't really do work with any category of machine learning, certainly not with proprietary transformer-based cutting-edge language model types of projects. My projects really involve very simple engagement with what Hannes Bayor, has recently described as linear algorithms. So one example, Samuel Beckett wrote a novel, Watt, when he was a courier for the French resistance in World War II. And it contains these very uncanny, unusual, bizarre passages which anticipate computing, or they're permutational passages. And so I've reenacted these through writing a short computer program, but allowed this program to extend these permutations to an absurd dimension. And so then this is my book, Megawatt, which is a way of reading Samuel Beckett's Watt, otherwise an illegible text as far as I can tell from my own perspective. Some of my other engagements, one of the few sort of data-driven projects that actually goes out and gets something from the web, is Hard West Turn, which is a sort of novel or conceptual poetry work about gun violence in the United States, starting from the table of deadliest mass shootings in the US, spidering outward and considering both the English and simple English Wikipedias. So it brings in all these sorts of topics which are wrapped up with domestic terrorism, with the Pulse shooting in Orlando, with the Las Vegas shooting. And so, the goth subculture connected to Columbine shooting and things like this. And brings them in a way that is far from coherent, or perhaps even cohesive. Actually, it's cohesive, but not coherent, if we want to be strict about it. It's reflective of a confusion in the American thinking about these topics. Similarly, trying to let very simple headline-like narratives emerge in Autopia, which is a book, again, a very, very short program at the end of this text animates this book, 4-page computer program that simply generates these short narratives composed out of only the singular and plural names of cars, and becomes sort of silly in a lot of cases as you read things like Ranger, Lasers, Continental, Sidekick, Mart Amigo, Rallies, Superb, Escort, Safaris. But then as you go on, you see Navajo accents, Continental, Scion. A lot of car names, it turns out, in the United States, they're named after Native people. A lot of these sentences that come together end up and a lot of car names are also named after the sort of professions or missions of European explorers, and they come together. You get sentences like, well, I mean, the Ford Explorer is a car, so you get sentences like Explorers, Ram Dakotas. Historically accurate, something that, that actually reflects encounters, European encounters with Native peoples in the United States. And that's really just simply that's using Tristan Tzara's method of just cutting up the names of automobiles and pulling them out of a hat, putting those together. So these types of things that we just let language speak for itself in even the simplest sorts of ways, you find out that the trade names that people have chosen for things, or the simple English sentences that they've written about the way parts of a gun fit together, turn out to be very unnerving and revealing in different ways.
Yeah, I love like car names as coded affect, right? Like Trailblazer Armada, you know. I mean, it's all there, right? Or you know, Patriot, Liberty, Compass, Freedom, you know,
Yeah,
Cutlass, all of those things.
Class, you know, one of there's sentences like New Yorker golfs.
Yeah,
that's one of the sentences that comes together, right?
And like it's this idea too of like extending maybe work that predates computation in a way, right? But that exists at the, or can exist at the level of permutations. You know, like, yeah, Tristan Tzar's cut up method, some of these, you know, methods from like the Oulipo school and the Surrealist and Dadaist. I'm thinking about one of my computation projects, also very like super simple. And like all it does is kind of like digitize work that is already existing in like a permutation form. And that's, you know, Tahim Bajessa's syncopated sonnets from Olio, right? The Millie and Christine McGuire, you know, syncopated star. And that's been designed, right, so that it can be permuted in all these different ways. And so it's like it already exists. And I'm posting it in the chat box here. And what all the generator really does, it just shows you the possibilities, right? The possibilities that are already existing, right, in the language that Jess has put together. Near infinite possibilities for combinations of these sonnets, right? Like the number is astronomically huge. But again, it's like it's you know, applying like a bit of computation to something, to language that is you know, existing in such a way that it can be combined, which I personally find really fascinating. And also, like, the project itself is really about, you know, people having access to some of these possibilities and being able to experience them. And again, that's like a deliberate choice to work with, you know, Jess's work as opposed to something else.
Sure, it's much closer, I think, to for instance, poets inventing a particular form, which they have no trademark or claim over, which other people can then work in, right?
Yeah.
And I make, you know, these very short programs that generate text in my work available as free and open source software. People are welcome to use them as a basis for their own projects if they like. You know, certainly to study them, modify them, share them with people, but even to, you know, sort of remix or transform those.
I'm seeing a lot of stuff in the chat. I don't know, Carly, if you're monitoring.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think Naya, if you want to be a brave soul, or I can and say your question, because I think it's particularly relevant to the conversation going on.
Sure, yeah. I was just wondering, because I'm also really interested in this aspect of generating in a way that's not exactly random, but not exactly done by the poet or the artist themselves. So my question was just about how you view agency in work that has been generated.
Well, I mean, from my standpoint, my medium is computation and language. So I consider that what I do is work in that medium. I don't think of the computer's operation. I think of it as being, it's autonomous in that I don't have to sit there and type something myself or write it out longhand. But it doesn't have separate agency. I've defined the program, which is the artwork, and then that program performs by running. And so from my standpoint, you know, that also means that I want to encapsulate everything in that program itself. I don't want to go back and edit after the fact. If my program embodies something that I find offensive or egregious or you know, aesthetically displeasing, then that's my problem. I don't have anyone else or anything else to blame.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. That there's, you know, it is a medium. Yes, the computer is, you know, autonomous, or the program's autonomous. Yes, and that you don't have to watch it. Although sometimes actually I do, but just because in terms of things like timing out, it's not that it's not autonomous. So yeah, I don't have to do that, right? It's like it's performing a function. When it comes to GPT-2, sometimes, I mean, I do watch that in the sense that I am curious about the output. And sometimes it's like, it's as good as gobbledygook, you know, it's clearly, you know, giving me an entire sentence from Reddit or an entire sentence from an article or whatever, right? Sometimes it's doing that. But there are moments, and this is, you know, my background is from literature. There are moments when, you know, the output is uncanny and surprising. And, you know, as a writer, it's hard for me not to see that and to read it and to attach some significance to it. You know, this is very much like Calvino's Ghost, right? In Cybernetics and Ghosts, right? The output from these combinatorial gains, you know, like they achieve significance, literary significance or emotional significance, because of the way certain things resonate socially, right? The things are kind of always ghosting through. So there are definitely moments when the GPT-2 output is strange and uncanny and compelling or unsettling, right? It definitely does things, because much of it is out of my control. It definitely does things that I don't want it to do. In which case I have all the agency in the world to choose whether or not to use what it prints out. And 95% of it is not usable, right? It's not particularly interesting, or, you know, it's coherent, but it's not logical, right? It doesn't make a kind of like sense that I could see it, you know, at least it's not useful for my means. But my programs are not nearly as self-contained as Nick's, or as elegant. So they don't always perform flawlessly, I would say.
I can go ahead and ask another question. This is off of Rebecca's question, who I think she had to duck out. I know she works, so she's probably back at her 9 to 5. But we talked about this in our meeting on Friday. How do you figure out when to edit? You talked about sort of editing for like comprehension and coherence and sort of getting rid of the gobbledygook. But when you're sort of using a recombinatory program like the one of Nick's that you used in Travesty Generator, and Nick, the ones that you create in large part for digital humanists and poets sort of all over the place. Like, how do you choose what to edit and when to edit, and like how do you weight the role of your editorial eye versus the role of like the computer's sort of combinatory ethos?
I have no problem like wielding the heavy hand of the editor in my work. And sometimes, you know, I also edit the programs to do certain things in different ways, right? Like, you know, a program can produce a lot of text or a little amount of text, right? Depending on what I want it to do, right? If I want to generate a single line, I'm going to edit that. If what I want is a single line and it produces 100, then it's a matter of like, well, I either go back and edit the program to give me just a single line, or I pick a line from the 100. Right, so, you know, it goes both ways for me. In the case of if something again like GPT-2, which I don't have a lot of control over, again, I just scrap what it produces, right? But with programs that I either sort of like remix or make on my own that generate text, like I have a lot more hands-on control. But I find that most of the editing I end up doing actually has to do with like what I'm actually trying to work with, right? Like since a lot of my work works with pre-existing texts, I feel like, you know, maybe 60 or 70% of the work goes into locating that text, cleaning it, and making it available for whatever the program has to do. So if something is coming out of the program that is, you know, that demonstrates that the program is working just fine, but it's giving me something that I'm not happy with, it usually has a lot to do with like the data that I'm giving the program to work with. So there's a, you know, a lot more, for me at least, there's a spectrum of editing that occurs that I find that is like very generative and rich and engaging for me as a writer, and encompasses actually far more, a much more comprehensive and laborious process than if I were to do it quote unquote conventionally, if that makes sense. And I'm putting scare quotes around the convention, which like you can't, the avatar isn't doing, but there's scare quotes there.
Yeah, I can only think of one example of work where I've made any editorial intervention. For instance, with Autopia, this is simply the output. I simply ran this program at the end and took the output starting from the beginning as much as I needed to fill this book. The True List, which is my most recent book from Counterpath, has deterministic output. So when you run it, the same thing is produced every time. The only exception is Hard West Turn, which originally I had planned to regenerate this book annually, and therefore allow it to incorporate new information about gun violence in the United States, because unfortunately there'll be additional mass shootings. As it happened, the problem, there was sort of mechanical problem with this, which is that I only wanted to do this project if I could use a print-on-demand facility of an independent bookstore. And my independent bookstore where I was doing the project, the one person who ran the espresso book machine left, there was no ability to do this. So and of course there's no ability to do it this year either because of the pandemic. So the project couldn't continue for that reason. But the first year that I did it, I went through and in a completely neutral, content neutral way, just copy edited the book. So one of the things that you may or may not know about Wikipedia is that there's no standard, for instance, for whether you use British spellings or American spellings in the English or Canadian spellings, etc., in the English language Wikipedia. And there's no standard for whether you use the series comma or Oxford comma or not. There's some tendency that some people would say, well, within an article, you should try to keep it one way or the other, but not really. So actually Wikipedia itself isn't coherent even within an article. And I decided I would make a book that was as readable as possible, and as a sort of challenge to myself, and a way of forcing myself to read through this confusion of information that's presented in this book. I would go through and copy edit it. But that's actually been the only sort of editorial process that I've engaged with. And some of that is simply because I don't use external data sources for the most part, this Hard West Turn project being one exception to that.
I saw some really good questions from Kieran and from Sam that sort of relate to one another. So Sam, do you want to go first and then Kieran? if you're still on, or I can just go ahead and read if that's preferable.
Sorry, was that me? Is there? I'm a Sam, but I don't know if there's a different Sam that you're referring to.
Yes, yeah, this is you, Sam. Thank you.
No, okay.
Let's see. If you wanna, do you wanna go ahead and ask your question, or should I?
Sorry, did you want me to read my question? Or?
Sure. Yeah, that would be great.
No.
Let's see. Looks like there may be some technical difficulties. Kieran, do you want to go ahead and read yours? Let's see. Okay.
Everyone looks shy. Maybe just read their questions.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I was trying to figure out some of the stuff, but Kieran said this is going back to sort of, but the conversation was between you and Grant about how descriptions of internet text sources for GPT can be described as unconscious, and then they ask, can't computer generated text projects be a real way of reclaiming and transforming a problematic source material?
I guess my short answer is yes. It can be a way of reclaiming and transforming problematic source material. And I think I've seen some instances of this, right? But you can also, I also like, depending on the source material, right? Like, I think like personally for me, am I politically and literary invested in reclaiming, like a horribly racist text? No, I'm not. When I can write a new one that's that isn't doing those things, right? But you definitely could, right? And I think that's an interesting project. And I think I've seen people like do stuff with like the Declaration of Independence. You could certainly use code and certain projects and like creative projects can illuminate, right, like the racism and equity embedded in certain textual documents, and do interesting things with them. And I think there's like a lot of value in exposing those things through computer generated text projects.
Yeah, I mean, without speaking to say GPT-3 specifically, my interest is in, I think, these projects where instead of sort of just reversing over, steamrolling some text, there's something in there, there's an aspect of the writing that you might use as a source that is compelling, in addition to many things that might be problematic. So Alison Parrish's engagement with the verse, the corpus of verse that is, in Project Gutenberg, with an awareness that is, a history of 18th, 19th century white men for the most part, but also taking pleasure in the fact that the language is put together nicely. It sounds good phonetically. There's something to that, right? So trying to not just voice an objection, but get something out of that. And you could do that with text from Reddit also. If someone wanted to, the sensitive autobiography of Anon, or something like that. I mean, there would be some way that you could approach those sorts of texts, those sorts of writings that might draw out something meaningful as you also produced a critique.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to use, computer code and methods as a form of reclamation, and also to sort of, you know, reveal the way in which text is used, right? And how, you know, how, its seeming neutrality in some instances is not in others, right? Which, like, again, like, these are fascinating prospects, right? When we think about like how things make meaning and in their context, right? All of that, I think, is very rich ground.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have time for one more question, and Zach Whalen, it looks like you had a great question about the relationship between the analog and digital for both Lillian-Yvonne and Nick. If you want to go ahead.
Sure, I can go ahead. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. Hi, Lillian-Yvonne. Hi, Nick Montfort. Good to
Hi.
see you all. Just it's a quick and almost kind of practical question, but you both include printed copies of your code in your books, and I thought it would be interesting to hear you reflect on why you chose to do that sort of differently. Unfortunately, I can't find either copy. I own 2 copies of Travesty Dinner, but I can't find them. So I can't refer to a specific page, Lillian-Yvonne, but I recall you using frequent comments, code comments in your source code, and that became part of how you read and interpret the meaning of the code and then the resulting poetry, and I thought that was really interesting. And Nick, you typically don't include source code. Oh, there it is. Yeah, thank you. So I'd be interested to hear both of your thoughts on how you approach the version of the code that we see printed on paper and any comments you add to it.
I mean, code is its own beauty, right? Like, I think it's its own language. It's interactive. Like, I love the way code looks on the page, even though by all means, I'm not a very elegant programmer or anything, but like the comments in code are there, right? Which is so interesting. Again, it has to do with what's being made visible in code and what's being made invisible, right? Like you would normally just see, like, let's say on the screen, you'd see the output of the code. You wouldn't see, you know, the black box. You wouldn't see what's going on under the hood. But once you get under the hood, there can actually be many things going on that have nothing to do with the actual output of the code. And that's the comments, right? And the comments are like a dialogue that one can have with other programmers, but they can also be a dialogue that if you know how to access it, you can find it and read it. And I find that very interesting, right? So I do use that, you know, in my poems, right? To have this, also having a dialogue with myself about what I see is going on and how I'm relating to the code.
Yeah, I am rather spare most of the time in including comments with code. I feel that the code should be straightforward enough on its own with appropriate naming of variables, functions, methods, etc., so that the question, how does it work, is obvious from looking at it. And then the question, well, why does it work this way? Why is it written in this particular way? Is something maybe better suited to an essay than to discussion in code. Now, when Stephanie Strickland and I did See and Spar Between, we actually did embed a critical essay cut to fit the Toolspin course in comments. And it's printed as, not printed in print, but it's presented in an issue of Digital Humanities Quarterly. There are cases where I go that route and try to bring that in, but I generally find that I want to let the, I want to get across the how as clearly as possible. And when it comes to the poetics of how this piece is written, why it is that I decided to make these particular decisions, that's probably something better outside the poem itself. The original Taroko Gorge, the Python program there, also has some very brief types of comments that explain how I've tried to fit things onto a page and some of the meaning of that poem for me. But in many cases, it's just enough to let the operation of the program work on its own?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, it really is. I don't want to go too far past 5, and Lillian-Yvonne Bertram and Nick Montfort, thank you so much for being here. Such a treat to listen to you guys talk and share your insights and work with us today. So can we give a Zoom round of applause for them?
Thank you for having us.
Zoom round. Zoom round. I'm clapping behind the avatar, I promise.
Yeah, such a treat. I learned a lot. I've got a million more questions sort of bubbling up in my brain. And if you have questions for me, for the series that will be sort of ongoing throughout the year, or for Lillian-Yvonne and Nick, I'm sure they wouldn't mind. Not too many of you, but some of you getting in touch.
Yeah, by all means, you can message me. I'm on Twitter, but in a very non-committal way.
Yep.
So you could tweet at me or something, but I might not see it for a few days.
Perfect. So if you have questions for them, hit them up on Twitter or otherwise. If you have questions or suggestions for me as we organize more of these events throughout the year, let me know. And thank you so much. It was great to be here and great to see you all.
Well, thank you all. And let me just invite people to take a look at the latest issue, just released a few days ago, of Taper.
Yes, Taper.
Which Lillian-Yvonne helped us to found. A literary magazine that is presented online of very, very concise computational poetry.
Amazing.
Yes, Taper is awesome.
Congrats.
Great. All right.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Lillian. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye, Gabby. I'll be in touch. I'll message you back.
Yeah, totally, Lillian. Totally. And Nick, thank you so much for coming. The two of you. Oh my gosh, my brain, it's blooming. Yeah, definitely, Lillian. We'll be in touch.
Awesome. Oh, did Erica leave? Yeah, she did.
Great work, Carly.
All right, I'm going to run and feed my cat. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much, both of you.
It was such a pleasure.
And Nick, we're meeting tomorrow or Thursday?
Thursday. I can confirm that if you want, but I am pretty sure.
Let me check my calendar. It's Thursday. Yes, it's Thursday. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right,
excellent. All right, I'll see you then.